This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
From the very beginning of Forensic Tales, I have always said that every case, no matter how old or unsolved, deserves to be remembered. This week, we've reached an incredible milestone together, episode 300. For 300 episodes, we've explored the breakthroughs, the science, and the stories behind some of the world's most haunting crimes. And I can't think of a better case to mark this moment than one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in true crime history. This is the story of the Zodiac Killer, a shadowy figure who terrorized Northern California in the late 1960s, leaving behind a trail of victims, taunting letters, and cryptic ciphers that still baffle investigators to this day. Despite decades of police work, suspects, and scientific advancements, the Zodiac's identity remains a mystery. For our 300th episode, we're going back to the beginning, revisiting the Zodiac's crimes, the evidence he left behind, and the forensic science that continues to pursue him. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 300, The Zodiac Killer. It's a case that's been described as arguably the most famous unsolved murder case in American history. There have been dozens of documentaries made about it, countless podcasts and YouTube episodes. It's become a fixture of pop culture and a focus by amateur detectives. The story has even inspired villains, including Scorpio in Dirty Harry, the Gemini Killer in Exorcist 3, John Doe in Seven, and the Riddler in the 2022 Batman movie. And while there is still so much we don't know about this case, there's a lot we do. Investigators agree there are 4 confirmed Zodiac attacks across the Bay Area of California between December 1968 and October 1969. 2 at suburban Lover's Lane, 1 daylight assault at Lake Berryessa, and a city homicide in San Francisco. 5 people were killed, and 2 survived to tell us what they saw. Although it's worth mentioning, the Zodiac himself would later claim in 1974 through his letters that he's killed at least 37, a claim the police haven't been able to verify. Lake Herman Road, December 20th, 1968. The Zodiac's first 2 confirmed victims. High school sweethearts, 16-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and 17-year-old David Faraday, parked on Lake Herman Road, a spot known to locals as a lover's lane. They were just 2 high school kids who wanted some time together alone before heading back home to their parents' house. Sometime after 11 p.m., a second vehicle pulled alongside them. The driver of that second car fired into theirs. As David tried to exit, he was shot in the head with a .22. Betty Lou got out of the car and tried to run away, but was shot multiple times as she ran. Of the 6 total shots that were fired at her, only 1 of them missed. The entire thing happened within just 2 or 3 minutes, and when all was said and done in the police investigation, there was no solid forensic evidence, no usable footprints at the scene, No tire impressions of the shooter, nothing when it came to the forensics. It just looked like a senseless crime, a madman wanting to kill two innocent teenagers that night while sitting on Lover's Lane. An ambush that would only make sense in hindsight. Blue Rock Springs, shortly after midnight, July 4th and 5th, 1969, the Zodiac's next confirmed victims. 22-year-old Darlene Ferrin and 19-year-old Michael Mago were sitting in a parked car when a man approached the passenger side and opened fire with a 9mm. Darlene was killed, but Michael survived with serious injuries. He was able to give the police a description of Zodiac, a heavyset white man around 5'8", 195 to 200 pounds, with a large face and curly light brown hair. He wore dark clothes and wasn't wearing glasses. But with a description like that, half the men in the Bay Area might have been suspects. At around 12:40 a.m. after the shooting, a man called Vallejo police from a payphone near the station, calmly reporting a double murder and adding, "They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." That call was the first clue that these two attacks were related. The 7 months between the Lake Herman Road and the Blue Rock Springs was the Zodiac's cooling off period. Some have speculated Darlene may have known her killer, but that's never been proven. Rumors started spreading after Robert Graysmith's 1986 book Zodiac, which cited interviews with some of her friends. Also because Michael reportedly gave conflicting reports, initially telling police he didn't recognize the shooter, but later claiming the man's name was Richard. Darlene's sister even said that she had once dated a man by that name. But once again, the idea that Darlene knew who the Zodiac was hasn't been proven. Right now, it's just one of the many possible theories tied to this case. Lake Berryessa, Napa County, September 27th, 1969. College students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were having a picnic when a man in a black hood marked with a crosshair symbol emerged, armed with a gun and pre-cut rope. He said he had just gotten out of jail and needed some money and their car to drive down to Mexico. After binding them, he stabbed both of them. Cecilia later died from 10 stab wounds, and Brian, who had been stabbed 6 times, somehow survived. But before leaving, the attacker drew the crosshair on Brian's car door and scrawled dates of the prior attacks with September 27, 69, 6:30 by knife. Earlier that day, multiple witnesses reported seeing a suspicious man at the lake that day, a dentist and his son, and later 3 women who even helped create a composite sketch. The man was described as about 6 feet tall and 200 pounds, consistent with survivor Brian Hartnell's later description. After the stabbing, the Zodiac then drove almost 30 miles from the lake to a car wash in downtown Napa. Then at 7:40 p.m., he called the Napa County Sheriff's Office to report the crime as well as confess. But oddly enough, he never hung up the phone. Just a few minutes after the call to the police was placed, a reporter arrived at the payphone where the phone was still hanging off the hook. From a forensic perspective, it was a win. Investigators were able to lift a wet palm print from the phone itself. Presidio Heights, San Francisco, October 11th, 1969, the last confirmed attack. Paul Stein, a cab driver and doctorate student, was shot in the head once during a fare to Presidio Heights. The Zodiac also took his car keys as well as his wallet. As it happened, 3 teenagers saw the entire thing from a house just a few feet away. They watched as the killer wiped the cab down and walked away. But due to a police clerical error, An incorrect suspect description was given to all the officers who were on patrol that night. They said the suspect was black. So when the officers encountered a white male near the crime scene who matched the teen's description of a husky white male in dark clothing, they let him go, thinking they were looking for an African American. This would soon become a detail that the Zodiac later taunted the authorities about in a letter. Days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received a bloody piece of Stein's shirt as proof. That same stretch of correspondence solidified the killer's brand. Letters beginning, "This is the Zodiac speaking," laced with threats, diagrams, and ciphers. He also threatened to shoot a tire on a school bus and kill children as they got off. On July 31st, 1969, 3 Bay Area newspapers each received nearly identical letters from someone claiming responsibility for the attack. They also enclosed parts of a 408-syllable cipher. And within days, a local couple cracked it, revealing Bose rather than a name. From there, the Zodiac's mailings continued, shifting from validation, shirt swatches, to theater, bomb diagrams, buttons, to puzzles, the 340 cipher solved decades later. The letters are what tied the crimes together in real time, and why no one can forget about this case even all of these years later. So that's what we know. 4 scenes, 2 survivors, and a voice on the phone, as well as some letters, leaving just enough physical forensic evidence for us to study and just enough mystery to haunt the case for decades. But could there be other Zodiac victims out there? Other suspected victims include Raymond Davis, a cab driver from Oceanside, California, who was found murdered in 1962, the 1963 beach murders of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards in Santa Barbara County, the 1964 shooting of honeymooners Johnny and Joyce Swindle in San Diego, and the 1966 killing of Sherry Jo Bates near Riverside City College. Later cases sometimes linked him to include the abduction of Kathleen Johns, the disappearance of nurse Donna Lass, and even the shooting of San Francisco Police Department officer Richard Radich. But even though these cases have undeniable similarities, like the use of a .22 caliber weapon, threats against buses, attacks on couples, or taunting letters, none of these cases have ever been conclusively proven to be the work of the Zodiac. When we look back at the Zodiac crimes, it's easy to imagine what investigators would do today: DNA testing, touch DNA on the bindings, genetic genealogy, and that's just to name a few. Today, investigators have so many forensic tools at their disposal. But back in 1968 and 1969, the reality of forensic science was much narrower. They had to work with the basics, traditional tools that could sometimes connect crimes, but rarely point to a specific suspect. And the first of those tools came into play almost immediately: ballistics. At both Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs, detectives recovered shell casings and bullets. And from that discovery, they were able to determine that a .22 caliber weapon was used in the first attack and a 9mm semi-automatic pistol in the second. Later on, microscopic comparison confirmed that the same 9mm was used in multiple shootings. But that's as far as it went, linking crime scenes to one another, but not to a particular suspect. There was no national ballistics database like NIBIN, so investigators couldn't scan casings together against thousands of others. They had to compare them manually underneath a microscope case by case. As you can imagine, that's a pretty tough job for even the most experienced forensic ballistic examiners. If ballistics helped link the crimes, investigators hoped fingerprints might identify the killer. But just like the bullets, the prints only took them so far. The most famous potential fingerprint came at Presidio Heights. When the killer wiped down Paul Stein's taxicab, he left behind what appeared to be a bloody latent print on the driver's side door. As you'd expect, the police lifted it, but in the 1960s, prints were compared by hand, just like the bullets. Examiners used magnifying glasses, overlay transparencies, and card files. A print could only be matched if a suspect was in custody or had been and took their prints in order to compare them directly. And with Zodiac, there was no one to compare against, or at least no one investigators could prove. With no matches from fingerprints, detectives shifted their focus to the killer's most personal signature, the handwriting in his taunting letters. Because if there was one forensic discipline the Zodiac case leaned on, it was handwriting. Every time a letter arrived at a newspaper, experts were called in to examine the penmanship, slant, and the pressure of the writings. They did things like compare the Zodiac's blocky, deliberate writing to dozens of suspects, including the most infamous Arthur Lee Allen, someone we're going to talk about a little later in the episode. But handwriting analysis is inherently subjective. Two experts could look at the same exact sample and come to two very different conclusions about them. To this day, handwriting has never been accepted as a definitive proof in a courtroom. It could suggest, but it couldn't convict. More on his letters in just a moment. Trace and biological evidence. At Lake Berryessa, Brian Hartnell's Volkswagen had the Zodiac's signature crosshair symbol scrawled across the door in black marker. The bindings used on Brian and Cecilia were recovered, but in 1969, there was no way to test them for touch DNA or microscopic skin cells. And the payphone palm print lifted in Napa, that was yet another missed opportunity of the era. Police had a clear impression, but no database to run it through. So without a suspect in hand, the print went nowhere. I think that has to make you stop and wonder, if the Zodiac committed his crime today, in 2025, would he be able to get away with it? Could we have recovered touch or trace DNA at one of these crime scenes? Something that we never dreamed possible in the late 1960s. Or would it be some other type of forensic technique that we have today but we didn't have back then? Would the Zodiac case be such a mystery if it happened in today's era? When we say the Zodiac case went cold, it wasn't for a lack of effort. It was because forensics simply hadn't caught up yet. Investigators had everything we talked about: bullets, prints, bindings, handwriting samples, even a swatch of the killer's clothing from Paul Stein's shirt. But they didn't have the science to wring out answers out of any of them. If the Zodiac's crimes were terrifying, then the letters were downright chilling. More than anything else, it was the written word that turned these murders into one of the most infamous unsolved cases in American history. So let's talk about the letters a little bit more. The first wave of them started in the summer of 1969. On August 1st, 1969, just weeks after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, 3 nearly identical letters arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle, San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. Each letter claimed responsibility for the Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs attacks, and inside each was 1/3 of a 408-character cipher. The killer demanded the newspapers publish the ciphers, or more lives would be taken. And each letter began with the phrase that would become his signature: "This is the Zodiac speaking." Within days of the letters popping up, a local couple, Donald and Betty Hardin of Salinas, cracked the puzzle. But the answers didn't reveal the killer's true identity or name, as he had teased. The Zodiac had delivered on his promise, but he remained anonymous. In November 1969, he sent what became known as the 340-character cipher to the Chronicle, and for decades, cryptographers, FBI analysis, and amateur codebreakers tried to solve it. It wasn't until December 2020 that a team of private citizens finally cracked the code using computer-assisted analytics. The message turned out to be another taunt, saying that he wasn't afraid of the gas chamber, and again referencing the afterlife. And just like the first cipher, it offered no identity, no smoking gun, just more games. As I've already hinted at, handwriting experts have examined every single one of the Zodiac's letters over the years. But beyond the writing itself, some experts chose to focus on the language. For instance, the Zodiac used phrases like blue meanies, trigger mechanism, and paradise. He also misspelled words inconsistently, sometimes correctly, sometimes phonetically. So experts in linguistics have debated whether this was intentional misdirection or an insight into his genuine education level. Another question we simply don't have the answer to. From 1969 through the mid-1970s, dozens of letters were attributed to the Zodiac. Some were confirmed authentic, others remained disputed. Some contained threats, others contained physical evidence. But when stacked together, the letters really formed a chilling portrait of a killer who wasn't content to just kill. He wanted to control the entire narrative. He wanted to taunt law enforcement. He wanted the public to be absolutely terrified about what he might do next or who his next victims could be. And for forensic investigators, they represented both the best chance at solving the case and the greatest frustration. The letters gave handwriting, ciphers, saliva on envelopes, fingerprints on paper, but none of that has led to a name yet. If there's one question everyone asks about the Zodiac today, it's this: why haven't they tested the DNA? The truth is, they have, multiple times, but the results have either been limited, inconclusive, and/or controversial. When talking about the DNA, we have to start in the 1990s, which is when the authorities made their first DNA effort. Like we've already talked about in so many episodes of the show so far, by the late 90s, DNA testing was completely changing cold cases, and the Zodiac is no different. The police turned to his letters, hoping saliva from the envelope flaps or stamps might have a genetic profile. Some of the samples were tested, but most of them were too degraded or too small to get any consistent results. At best, they developed partial DNA profiles, not a full sequence. Partials can be used to compare against suspects, but they usually aren't good enough to make a definitive identification. When I talk about how the Zodiac case could be solved, we'll talk about how DNA in this case could still be very useful. But for now, let's go back to a name you heard at the start of the episode: Arthur Lee Allen. For a long time, Allen remained pretty much at the top of the suspect list. He was a former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender who many people thought could be the Zodiac. And even though he was questioned many times by the police over the years, he always denied it. But when his DNA was compared to the letters, there was no match. His DNA never matched anything related to this case. The same went for several other persons of interest. No match. But here's just some food for thought. If the Zodiac had someone else lick his stamps or his envelopes, or if contamination occurred, then negative results don't necessarily clear anyone. He could have thought of everything beforehand. He knew by licking the envelopes, he was leaving his DNA behind. So maybe he had someone else do it. Just something to think about. Moving forward a couple of years to 2002. In 2002, the Vallejo Police Department made a pretty shocking announcement. They said they had been able to obtain a partial DNA profile from Zodiac's letters. This partial was also able to definitively exclude Allen and a few others. But again, it wasn't a complete sequence. They could be good for excluding certain people, but it certainly didn't include anyone either. That brings us to the next point about the DNA evidence. After the Golden State Killer arrest in 2018, the obvious question was, could the same forensic genealogy technique work for the Zodiac? Most of us are very familiar with the GSK case by now. In 2018, investigators finally identified Joseph James DeAngelo using forensic genetic genealogy. By uploading a crime scene DNA profile into public genealogy databases, they were able to trace relatives, build out a family tree, and ultimately pinpoint DeAngelo as the Golden State Killer. It was the case that proved just how powerful this new forensic tool could be for solving decades-old mysteries. So could that same technology be used in this case? Well, that same year, the Vallejo Police Department confirmed they had submitted samples for genealogy analysis in partnership with GEDmatch, but no definitive results came from it. Now, it's unclear why the analysis wasn't successful. All we know is that the Vallejo police didn't have any luck with it. And according to the FBI, they haven't been able to use genetic genealogy successfully either. They have said they're still exploring its use to try to nail down who this guy could be. But again, so far with the police departments locally and at the federal level, it hasn't worked. Now, just to recap, here's the DNA we actually have. According to statements by the San Francisco Police Department and Vallejo investigators, the Zodiac evidence includes at least one partial male profile from a letter, a bloody fingerprint at Paul Stein's cab, though never conclusively tied to the killer, and the palm print from the payphone in Napa. I think it's fair to say that it's very possible that one of these could hold the key. Will it be through a direct comparison eventually? Or could it be through genealogy and one of the public databases? I guess time will only tell. Despite the limited and often inconclusive DNA results, interest in unmasking the Zodiac has never faded. And in recent years, that determination has even spilled outside official investigations. In 2021, a private group calling themselves the Case Breakers claimed that they had identified the Zodiac as Gary Post, a house painter who died in 2018. They cited photo comparisons, a scar on his forehead, and alleged links to military service. They even said he had confessed to the murders to at least 6 people before his death. And as for the forensics, the group specifically points to military-style boot prints from the crime scenes matching his exact size and his exact style. The group also suspected that Gary might have been responsible for the 1966 murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside, California, an unsolved crime they believe was the Zodiac's first. Forensic evidence at the Bates crime scene allegedly includes a paint-splattered wristwatch found by investigators. But could Gary be the Zodiac? Well, if you ask the FBI, they maintain the investigation is, quote, still open and unsolved. A pretty clear answer to the question of whether they think this is the guy or not. 2 years later, in 2023, the case breakers released another statement claiming that an FBI whistleblower revealed Gary was secretly listed as a suspect in their database since 2016, and that the FBI had a partial DNA sample. However, the FBI has not publicly confirmed these allegations. Without cold, hard forensic evidence, theories like Gary Post remain just that, speculation. The real key to solving Zodiac's identity will almost certainly come from science. And that brings us to the future of DNA technology. As a consumer of true crime and forensic science content, you know that DNA technology is advancing every single day, and it's advancing very fast. Techniques like whole genome sequencing and ultra-sensitive DNA recovery have allowed companies like Othram to solve cases once thought unsolvable. Again, if you've been a listener of my show for a while, you've heard me talk about Othram all of the time and all of the amazing things that they've been able to do for old cold cases. So here's what I think is possible. If a clean sample of the Zodiac's DNA actually exists, we can still figure out who he is. Maybe he's already dead. Maybe he's still alive, living his life somewhere, always looking over his shoulder. I think it's still possible that through forensic testing, we can identify him one day. But when exactly will that day come? I think when we look at the Zodiac case today, it's tempting to see only failure, decades of investigation, hundreds of suspects, and still no answers. But the story of the Zodiac is also the story of forensic science itself, its limitations then, and its potential now. Fast forward to today, and we've seen cases once thought completely unsolvable finally crack open. The Golden State Killer, who I mentioned a few minutes ago, identified through forensic genetic genealogy. The boy in the box was given his name after 65 years, thanks to advanced DNA testing. And John and Jane Doe cases across the country are being solved almost every single week. That's why many forensic experts still believe the Zodiac could be solved. And to be completely honest, the Zodiac case isn't just about identifying one man. It's about closure for all of these victims' families and their loved ones. We all want that. Forensics couldn't catch the Zodiac in 1969, but it still might half a century later. The Zodiac Killer remains one of the most enduring mysteries in criminal history. His crimes were brutal, his letters unforgettable, and his identity still hidden. But what this case shows us 300 episodes later is that forensic science is never finished. Each new method, each new discovery keeps hope alive that one day even the Zodiac's shadow will finally come to light. And with that, that's all for today's episode of Forensic Tales. But before we close, I want to take a moment to recognize something special. This marks our 300th episode together. 300 stories, 300 families, 300 reminders of why truth and justice matter. When I launched this show, I never imagined the journey that it would take us on, the cases we've explored, the breakthroughs we have witnessed, and the community we have built along the way. None of this would be possible without you, the listener, who tune in week after week, share these stories with me, and keep the memories of the victims alive. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Here's to the next 300 episodes, the cases still waiting to be told, and the hope that one day every mystery will find an answer. I'm Courtney Fretwell, and this has been the 300th episode of Forensic Tales. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to help create compelling new cases, fund research, and assist with production and editing costs, you can support the show with a small monthly contribution. In return, you'll be one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. Thank you so much to this week's newest Patreon supporter, Shawnee. To learn more, visit patreon.com/Forensic Tales. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers: Tony A., Christine B., Sherry A., Michael D., Nicola, Megan G., Ureli, Jerry, Ann F., Carol A., Shannon D., Mary N. C., Lois B., Lynn H., Ashley H., Danielle D., Chrissy D., Brett R., Luz Raquel, and Christine K. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or email me at Courtney@ForensicTales.com. Thank you for listening, and see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.